out! Hands on the dash! Now! Do it!
Officer, look at the ID. For your own sake.
Is that a threat? You think you're funny? Get out before I drag you out!
Easy. I am Judge Marcus Sterling. You just made the biggest mistake of your life.
The sun was beginning its slow descent over the suburban outskirts of Oak Ridge, casting long, amber shadows across the pristine leather interior of Marcus Sterling's Ferrari 812 Superfast. To anyone else, the car was a symbol of extreme wealth, a rolling statement of ego. To Marcus, it was a hard-earned gift to himself, a reward for 25 years of navigating the complex, often grueling corridors of the American justice system. Marcus wasn't just a lawyer or a successful businessman, he was a man who had spent his life interpreting the very fabric of the law. As a federal judge, his days were filled with heavy decisions that shifted the scales of liberty. Today, however, he just wanted to feel the wind. He had just closed a landmark civil rights case and needed the hum of a V12 engine to drown out the echoes of the courtroom. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly trimmed, exuding an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He felt at peace until the strobing blue and red lights shattered the golden afternoon. 2 miles behind him, Officer Derek Miller was having a very different kind of day. Miller was a man who thrived on the weight of his badge. In the Oak Ridge Police Department, Miller was a known quantity, a ticking time bomb, with 3 internal affairs complaints hidden under a rug of proactive policing. He felt the world was becoming too soft, and he saw himself as the hard line. To Miller, the black Ferrari wasn't just speeding, it was suspicious. In his mind, a man who looked like Marcus shouldn't be behind the wheel of a $250,000 machine in this neighborhood. Miller didn't see a citizen, he saw a target. He felt that familiar surge of adrenaline, the sour taste of bile and excitement in the back of his throat. He gripped the steering wheel of his cruiser, his knuckles white. He wasn't looking for a traffic violation, he was looking for a win. Miller's history was a trail of broken trust. He had been passed over for sergeant twice due to temperament issues. He felt disrespected by the system he served, and he compensated by demanding absolute, immediate oration from everyone he stopped. He pulled his cruiser into a jagged diagonal behind the Ferrari, a tactical park designed to intimidate. Marcus watched the cruiser in his rear-view mirror. He didn't feel fear, he felt a weary sense of disappointment. He knew the statistics, but he always hoped his community was better than this. He pulled over smoothly, turned off the engine, and kept his hands visible. He could hear the heavy, metallic clank of the officer's door opening and the crunch of boots on gravel. Miller didn't walk, he stormed. He approached the driver's side window, his hand resting ostentatiously on the grip of his service weapon. The smell of cheap coffee and nervous sweat preceded him. Before Marcus could even speak, Miller slammed his palm against the roof of the Ferrari, the loud thwack echoing through the quiet street. License, registration, and proof of ownership, Miller barked, his voice straining with unearned aggression. And don't give me any attitude, or this is going to be a very long night for you. Marcus looked up, his eyes calm, noting the name Miller on the silver plate pinned to the officer's chest. The confrontation had begun. The air between the 2 men crackled with a tension that was almost physical. Officer Miller stood with his legs braced in a wide, aggressive stance, his shadow looming over the low-slung Ferrari. He didn't just want the documents, he wanted a reaction. He wanted Marcus to stutter, to argue, or better yet, to reach for something too quickly. "I'm waiting," Miller sneered, his fingers drumming a rhythmic, threatening beat on the car's roof. "Or do you have a problem understanding English? License and registration." Now, Marcus didn't move immediately. He knew that in a situation like this, the first 5 minutes dictated the next 5 years of a legal battle. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of the expensive Italian leather inside the car contrasting sharply with the smell of hot asphalt and Miller's hostility. "Officer Miller," Marcus began, his voice dropping into the resonant, calm tone he used when delivering a verdict from the bench. "I am going to reach for my wallet in my internal coat pocket. It is on the left side. I am doing so slowly. Do you understand?" Miller's eyes narrowed. He hated the calm. He hated the way this man spoke with a precision that suggested he was the one in control. "Just get the damn ID, and keep the other hand where I can see it. I've seen your type try to hide things before. What is it today?" Drugs? A weapon? Or did you just borrow this car from your boss? Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The boss comment wasn't just an insult, it was a window into Miller's worldview. To Miller, a black man in a Ferrari couldn't possibly be the owner. He had to be a servant, a thief, or a dealer. As Marcus slowly pulled his wallet from his charcoal blazer, Miller leaned further into the window, his body cam catching the glint of the judge's gold watch. Miller's internal monologue was a frantic loop of resentment. Look at this guy. Thinks he's better than me, thinks the suit makes him untouchable. I'm the law here. I'm the one with the gun. Here is my driver's license, Marcus said, handing over the plastic card. Miller snatched it without looking at it, stuffing it into his pocket. And the registration? Or is that going to be another speech? It's in the glove box, Marcus replied. I am reaching for it now. As Marcus leaned across the passenger seat, Miller's hand moved instinctively to the strap of his holster. He was looking for a reason. He watched Marcus's every muscle fiber. When Marcus opened the glove box, a small, leather-bound folder sat on top of the manual. Marcus retrieved it and held it out. Miller took the folder, flipped it open, and barely glanced at the name. He was too busy looking for something incriminating in the cabin. He saw a briefcase in the passenger footwell. What's in the bag? Miller demanded, pointing his flashlight even though it was still daylight. The beam danced across the fine grain of the leather. Legal documents. Officer, they are confidential, Marcus said firmly. Confidential, huh? That's what they all say right before we find the bricks of cocaine. Miller laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Step out of the car. I'm going to conduct a search of this vehicle. I smell marijuana coming from the cabin. Marcus felt a cold flash of anger. The smell of marijuana was the oldest trick in the book. A fabricated probable cause to bypass the Fourth Amendment. Officer Miller, we both know there is no such scent in this vehicle, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. I am a non-smoker, and this car is 3 weeks old. You are stepping onto very thin ice. I strongly suggest you look at the second ID card in that folder you are holding. Miller didn't look. Instead, he reached for his radio, his eyes locked on Marcus's. Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I have a 10 to 95, suspicious male, non-compliant, requesting backup for a vehicle search and possible 10 to 15. Subject is acting erratic and making veiled threats. Copy that, Unit 42. Backup is 3 minutes out. Miller smirked, a jagged, triumphant expression. Hear that? My boys are on the way. Now, for the last time, get out of the car before I break this window and drag you out through the glass. Marcus looked at Miller, really looked at him and saw the ruins of a career. He saw a man who had forgotten his oath in favor of his ego. Very well, officer, Marcus said, clicking his seatbelt release. If this is the path you've chosen, we shall walk it to the end. The high-pitched wail of approaching sirens began to tear through the quiet afternoon air, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. Officer Miller's chest puffed out, fueled by the arrival of his reinforcements. He felt the surge of power that came with a pack mentality. Hands behind your head, walk toward the back of the vehicle. Miller screamed, his voice cracking under the weight of his own adrenaline. Marcus stepped out of the Ferrari with a deliberate, measured grace. He stood a full head taller than Miller, his presence imposing not because of bulk, but because of a lifetime of command. He felt the heat radiating off the car's engine and the grit of the roadside gravel beneath his polished Oxfords. Despite the shouting and the flashing lights, Marcus remained a pillar of calm, the eye of the storm. 2 more patrol SUVs screeched to a halt, kicking up clouds of stinging dust. 3 officers spilled out, their hands already hovering near their belts. One of them, a younger officer named Holloway, looked at the Ferrari and then at the man standing beside it. He felt a flicker of doubt. Something about the man's posture didn't fit the combative suspect description Miller had radioed in. "What do we got, Miller?" one of the newcomers asked, unholstering a taser. Refusal to comply, suspicious behavior, and I smelled a heavy odor of narcotics from the interior. Miller lied, his eyes darting toward the small crowd of neighbors beginning to gather on the sidewalk. Several people had pulled out their phones, the lenses capturing every second of the confrontation. "I am not refusing to comply," Marcus stated, his voice carrying over the noise of the idling engines. "I have provided my license and the registration." I am now informing all of you that this officer is attempting an illegal search based on a fabricated smell of marijuana. I am Judge Marcus Sterling, and I am telling you to stand down." Miller let out a bark of mocking laughter. "A judge? Yeah, and I'm the president. You hear that, boys? We got ourselves a judge in a Ferrari. Probably bought it with the money he made selling to kids." Miller stepped forward into Marcus's personal space, his face inches from the judge's. The smell of stale coffee was overpowering. "You're not a judge here, pal. You're just another guy in handcuffs." Miller grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. He shoved Marcus against the hot metal of the Ferrari's trunk. Marcus felt the searing heat of the engine through his suit jacket, but he didn't cry out. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, recording the sensation, the timestamp, and the names of the officers watching. "Search the car," Miller commanded. "Officer Miller," Marcus said, his voice muffled against the trunk but still clear. "You have been warned. You are currently violating a federal officer's civil rights. The folder in your hand, look at the secondary ID. If you open that car door, there is no turning back for your career." Holloway, the younger officer, noticed the leather folder still gripped in Miller's left hand. He saw the corner of a gold-embossed card peeking out. "Hey, Miller, maybe we should just check the ID real quick? Just to be sure." "Shut up, Holloway," Miller snapped, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "I know a perp when I see one." He's stalling. "Check the briefcase. I bet it's full of cash or weight." One of the other officers reached for the Ferrari's door handle. The crowd on the sidewalk began to shout, "He wasn't doing anything. We saw the whole thing." Miller ignored them, his ego blinding him to the cliff he was about to walk over. He tightened the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists until they bit into the skin, the metal ratcheting with a cold, clinical click, click, click. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller whispered into Marcus's ear, a sadistic grin spreading across his face. "But I really hope you don't. I want to hear you keep lying all the way to the station." As the officer's hand gripped the door handle of the Ferrari, a blacked-out command SUV pulled up to the scene. The Oak Ridge chief of police, who had been monitoring the radio chatter and grew concerned by Miller's erratic reporting, stepped out. The air seemed to leave Miller's lungs. But he didn't stop. He thought the chief was here to see his big bust. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The arrival of Chief Harrison was like a cold douse of water on the heated aggression of the scene. The younger officers immediately stood up straighter, their hands moving away from their weapons. But Miller, fueled by a toxic mix of adrenaline and misplaced pride, didn't sense the change in the wind. "Chief, glad you're here," Miller called out, still keeping his knee pressed into Marcus's lower back. "Just caught this guy. Stolen vehicle, most likely, impersonating a federal official, and he's been resisting from the moment I pulled him over. I've got probable cause for a full vehicle sweep." Chief Harrison didn't say a word. He walked slowly toward the Ferrari, his eyes locked on the man pinned against the trunk. Harrison had been to enough federal galas and judicial conferences to recognize the most powerful man in the district's legal circuit. His face went pale, a ghostly white that made the veins on his neck stand out. "Miller," the chief said, his voice a low, vibrating growl, "take your hands off him, right now." "But chief, the suspect." "I said unhand him," Harrison roared, a sound so loud it silenced the gathering crowd. Miller flinched, his grip loosening in pure shock. He stumbled back as Holloway, sensing the impending disaster, rushed forward with the handcuff key. Marcus stood up slowly, adjusting his charcoal blazer with a calm that was far more terrifying than Miller's shouting. His wrists were red and chafed, the silver hair slightly disarrayed, but his gaze was like forged steel. "Judge Sterling," Chief Harrison said, stepping forward and extending a hand that was visibly trembling. "Sir, I cannot begin to apologize for." "Don't," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a gavel strike. "Save your apologies for the deposition, Chief. Your officer has the ID I provided. I suggest you read it out loud so there is no confusion for the body cam." The chief turned to Miller, who was standing paralyzed, the leather folder still in his hand. Harrison snatched it away. He flipped it open to the second compartment. There, shimmering under the afternoon sun, was the gold-crested identification of a presiding federal judge of the United States District Court. "Miller, you idiot," the chief whispered. loud enough for the body cams to catch. "You just arrested the man who oversees our department's federal oversight soul. You just handcuffed a federal judge." The silence that followed was deafening. Miller's jaw literally hung open. The tough guy persona evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at the Ferrari, then at the badge, then at the man he had just called a drug dealer. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. His career, his pension, and his reputation were dissolving in real time. I didn't see the badge, Chief. He was being suspicious." Miller stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "He gave you the folder 10 minutes ago, Officer Miller," Marcus said, stepping into Miller's space. The height difference was now a psychological mountain. "You chose not to look. You chose to manufacture a smell of narcotics. You chose to ignore the law you swore to uphold because you didn't like the color of the man driving this car." Marcus turned to the chief. "I want his badge on your desk by sunset, and I want the footage from every camera on this scene preserved. My clerks will be filing the federal civil rights lawsuit by 9 a.m. tomorrow." Miller looked around at his fellow officers, but they all looked away. They weren't his boys anymore. They were witnesses to his professional suicide. The crowd on the sidewalk began to cheer as the chief himself took Miller's service weapon and began unclipping his radio. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. By the next morning, the Ferrari judge story was lead news across the country. The body cam footage, which Chief Harrison had been forced to release under extreme pressure from the Department of Justice, became the most watched video in the state's history. The public was horrified not just by the aggression, but by the blatant fabrication of probable cause that Miller had so confidently performed. For Derek Miller, the descent was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, he was placed on unpaid administrative leave. By the end of the week, following an emergency hearing, his badge was revoked. He wasn't just fired. He was decertified, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement anywhere in the United States again. The man who had walked with a swagger of untouchable authority now sat in his small apartment, watching his own professional execution on the evening news. But the real battle was in the courtroom, a place where Marcus Sterling was the undisputed master. Marcus didn't just sue for himself, he sued to make a statement. The lawsuit filed against the Oak Ridge Police Department and the City Council was a masterclass in legal precision. It detailed years of proactive policing that was actually a thin veil for systemic profiling. Marcus used his $18 million settlement not to buy more cars, but to establish a nonprofit legal center dedicated to defending citizens from police misconduct. The city of Oak Ridge was forced to pay the full amount, a staggering sum that led to the resignation of several city officials and the implementation of a federal monitor to oversee the department. Chief Harrison, though he had tried to de-escalate the scene, was ultimately forced into early retirement for failing to discipline Miller after his previous 3 complaints. 6 months later, Marcus was back in the driver's seat of his Ferrari. He was driving down the same stretch of road where Miller had stopped him. He pulled over at the exact same spot, not because of a siren, but to look at the sunset. A cruiser drove by a new model with a new officer. The officer slowed down, saw the Ferrari, and then saw the driver. This time, the officer didn't reach for his gun or his radio. He gave a respectful nod and kept driving. Marcus watched the cruiser disappear into the distance. He knew that one lawsuit wouldn't fix everything, but as he shifted the Ferrari into gear and heard the roar of the engine, he knew that in this small corner of the world, the scales had finally found their balance. The bully with a badge was gone, and the law, the real law, had been served. The video ends with a black screen and a simple message. True power isn't found in a badge or a gun, but in the courage to stand for justice when it's most difficult.